All right, looks like we've got a critical mass. Well, I want to welcome everyone to our webinar. This is UC Berkeley Law School Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment, and UCLA Law School's Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. Our webinar on supercharging electrolyzers, boosting zero-emission hydrogen production and deployment in California. This comes on the heels of a new report that the two law schools have issued with the support of Bank of America with that exact title about trying to boost zero-emission hydrogen production in the state through bringing down the cost of the electrolyzers, which you're going to hear a lot about on this webinar. My name is Ethan Elkind. I direct the climate program at Berkeley Law's CLEE, Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment. We're an in-house research center based at the law school, working to develop law and policy solutions to pressing environmental and energy challenges. And we work with students and faculty and stakeholders, including some of the folks that we've got on the lineup here today to describe this issue and discuss this issue in greater depth. A little bit later, we're going to be hearing from those speakers. We have Tyson Eckerly from the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, otherwise known as GoBiz, and Jesse Marquez, Executive Director of the Coalition for a Safe Environment. But before we hear from them, we're also going to get a brief overview of the new report, which is available at both the clee.berkeley.edu website and the UCLA Law School's Emmett Institute on the Environment website, and our joint website, climatepolicysolutions.org, where you can see other reports in the series. So as mentioned, this report is a product of the two law schools with the support of Bank of America, and it's been a long-standing partnership dating back to 2009, the Climate Change and Business Research Initiative, where we look at topics like zero-emission hydrogen, new technologies, and existing technologies that we need to scale to meet our climate change goals here in California, knowing that what we do in California doesn't just stay in California, it can influence the rest of the country and the rest of the world in our effort to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions. So with that partnership in mind, I want to introduce my colleague and former professor and mentor, Sean Hecht, who is the co-executive director of the Emmett Institute on Climate Change and the Environment at UCLA Law School. So Sean, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
sounds good.
I've been having some pretty serious audio issues. Welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be able to welcome everybody on behalf of UCLA. This has been a partnership for over a decade between us at UCLA's Emmett Institute and Berkeley Law's Center for Law, Energy, and the Environment, with the consistent support of Bank of America. We have, I think, a very exciting program up today, thinking about how hydrogen might be able to be used to supplement other types of alternative fuels, but only under circumstances where that hydrogen is zero emissions. And we're going to hear a lot more about that from Ross and from our other panelists. Overall, this initiative has really been a terrific collaboration between the two schools and Bank of America, working on developing solutions that are really going to push policies forward to address greenhouse gas emissions throughout multiple different business sectors. And I think Ethan has done a wonderful job of spearheading this over the past decade or more. I'd like to introduce Rich Brown from Bank of America. Rich has been an incredible partner for us over the years. He's been a real all the work we've done in ways that I think have really made an impact. Rich is the Senior Vice President and Environmental Program Director at Bank of America, and his unwavering support for addressing climate policy and
Sounds like Sean's a little bit frozen. Sorry, Rich, because I think he was going to say something really nice. You already said some nice things about you. But we'll have to wait for him to conclude those thoughts. So over to you, Rich.
Okay. Well, thanks, Sean. Thanks, Ethan. I'll keep this very brief. I just want to say that this has really been a fantastic partnership, as Sean mentioned, that has gone on really since 2009. And the reason we have stuck with it is because this team at both UCLA and at UC Berkeley Law, they know how to get the right people together on the right issues at the right time. and it has really had an impact. These reports that have been generated over the years have been on key topics. And the other thing we really like about this is that these are not reports that have just sat on shelves collecting dust. They are used by policymakers, by legislators, and by the business and nonprofit communities to help to drive these things forward. And we all know we need to accelerate across the board. Bank of America has committed $1 trillion over the next 10 years to help finance that transition. And we know that transition is going to take a lot of traditional clean energy solutions, but some of these more advanced clean energy solutions are going to be critical to making it happen. And California is in that leadership position. And I think that's what we're going to hear about today. So I'm excited to hear about more of the discussion. So Ethan, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you, Rich, and definitely want to echo Sean and thank you and your colleagues at the bank for this partnership. And again, I'll just plug that website, climatepolicysolutions.org, where you can see all of the reports that we put out in this series since 2009. So with that, let's begin the substantive part of the discussion. I want to introduce my colleague, Climate and Methane Fellow here at CLEE, Ross Zellen, who's going to give an overview of the report, Supercharging Electrolyzers, Boosting Zero-Emission Hydrogen Production and Deployment in California. So Ross, over to you.
Thanks so much, Ethan. And thank you to everybody who turned out today to join us. We're really gonna try to provide a general overview of both the topic itself and also a little bit for folks who are a little unfamiliar with hydrogen. Just a 101 here for just a second, so we can all kind of be on the same page. And there's a lot of news about hydrogen that we see in the climate space every day on Twitter, on social media, the New York Times, and there is a lot of money in going into hydrogen. But really, this convening that we brought together back in the spring really looked at how do we support zero-emission hydrogen, which is the electrolyzers, and so that's what we're going to dive into today. And so as somebody who struggled in high school chemistry, I get a little intimidated when we jump right into words like electrolyzers or chemical reactions. So we thought it would be helpful just to provide some definitions and an overview of what hydrogen is. And, hydrogen is really abundant. It's the most abundant element in the entire universe. Some could say we're full of hot air. We're really just full of hydrogen. But it's the simplest and lightest element in the universe. And, hydrogen normally exists as a gas, but it, for the sake of this conversation, we're going to talk about it in different forms, including, liquid hydrogen, which, really has to be frozen to like -423 degrees Fahrenheit in order to be kind of transported and, plugged into its end use. So we'll talk about how hydrogen is going to be able to be moved, how it is an energy carrier. So it really has this kind of bonding to other elements and other things that we see in nature and in the energy sector, like natural gas, ammonia, methane, those types of things. So hydrogen is normally produced from fossil fuels. That's where we get 99.6% of our hydrogen today comes from fossil fuels, from either a process called steam methane reforming or other coal processes. Can also come from nuclear processes, biomass gasification, which is worthy of a separate topic, a separate conversation. And then today's topic, which is the process of electrolysis. So you can see the three different terms that we'll use, to describe this zero-emission hydrogen world that we're trying to accelerate and try to support. So, why is hydrogen in the news as much as it is? And, the idea is hydrogen can serve for a variety of different use cases. And so it, can really help get after some of the difficult to decarbonize sectors of our economy, the areas that we're not necessarily going to be able to electrify as easily. And so we brought together a group of stakeholders, government leaders, regulators, utilities, project developers, environmental advocates, community environmental justice organizers, and really tried to delve into the buzz around the hydrogen economy. Hydrogen is experiencing kind of this unprecedented government support right now. There's money everywhere, and Tyson will be able to talk more about that. But really, where is this hydrogen going to go, and what is it going to be used for? And there's still a lot of unknowns, quite honestly, about what everything is going to be. What it's going to be used for. Is it going to be a Swiss Army knife of a energy carrier? Will it be able to be used for energy storage and energy and to replace peaker plants? Will it be able to be used to solve some of our heavy industry and solve things in refineries and cement and steel making? And then also for transportation, we're really, there's a lot of buzz around whether hydrogen can be used as a successful and viable strategy for light, medium, and heavy duty transportation. But we'll really focus on the medium and heavy duty transportation aspects of today. And Tyson can talk a little bit about the state's efforts there as well. Moving to what California and the federal government have been doing, quite honestly, we could do a full hour just on the influx of dollars coming into the hydrogen economy. Tyson's going to speak in depth about the Hydrogen Hub, which is a result of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. We can talk a little bit about the tax benefits, which are important. They are the backbone of the Inflation Reduction Act when it comes to climate investments, and really going to be able to support project developers in doing, in supporting this kind of nascent technology. It's important to know that, it's the IRS and the Treasury Department that are actually working through the tax code to kind of set up the standards for, what clean or qualified clean hydrogen will be. And so, based on the Department of Energy research, the Treasury Department has clarified that, production tax credits are only going to be able to be realized by hydrogen projects if they're emitting less than 4 kilograms of CO2 based on a life cycle analysis. So that's kind of the standard of what qualified hydrogen is. And then in the California budget, there was an influx last year due to the large surplus and the support for hydrogen of $100 million for demonstration projects. We can hear a little bit about how that's going and where that might lead to. And now we've got 2 pieces of legislation that is now being kind of implemented by these agencies. Senate Bill 1075, which is really charging the energy agencies, the Air Resources Board, the Energy Commission, and the Public Utilities Commission to really identify the role for electrolytic hydrogen and the zero-emission process. So what did our convening kind of suss out? We really saw that the barriers really set around state policy, the high cost. Right now electrolyzers are 2 to 3 times as expensive at minimum than traditional hydrogen. So there's not really that market pull telling folks, you need to, invest in electrolyzers and invest in electrolytic hydrogen because it's just significantly more expensive and the technology is so nascent. To put this into context, there's about the Department of Energy, Federal Department of Energy estimates that there's about 20 megawatts of electrolyzer capacity installed across the entire country, with about 100 megawatts currently in the pipeline. Whereas if you compare that to solar, we have about 100 gigawatts online today, and that's 100,000 megawatts. So we're really looking at just a drop in the bucket when it compares to how far we've come with solar. But really what we're looking at is the ability to use that solar and use that wind power that's, right now creating excess power on the grid. And how do we use that power to reduce costs for electrolyzers and put that energy to work so it can create the hydrogen and then help us get off of fossil fuels in some of these use cases. So what did we really see as some, clear-cut solutions that can be implemented? We really looked at a variety of actions that the state agencies and state government can be taking, governor's office included. But we also looked at, what has happened, and, Tyson will talk about the advancements in what the entity known as ARCHES, which is the Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy System, has doing. And, really one of the things that we were lucky in choosing this topic when we did, because there's been so much learning by doing over the last 6 months, really as this U.S. Department of Energy Hydrogen Hub grant has come out. Coalitions have been built, organizations have been created, and there's been a lot of progress fast about how do we solve these problems for local land use decisions, as you can see, for job standards and how do we support a just transition, and how do we also send the right regulatory policies and signals that we need to be investing in electrolytic hydrogen instead of any other fossil-based production. So, we're going to ask both Tyson and Jesse to really talk about what their perspective is of what comes next for hydrogen in the year 2023. But it's simply, we can say today that it's going to be a very busy year for hydrogen. In the state regulatory world, the California Air Resources Board has promised to reopen the low carbon fuel standard. Reopening this program could allow for administrative tweaks and fixes to end or reduce certain pathways that allow hydrogen producers to claim that their fossil-based hydrogen is renewable through, the purchase of credits, which doesn't really lead to supporting electrolyzers. It can lead to supporting, dairy and livestock methane, biogas, or other things. How the way that carbon intensity is rated as part of the low carbon fuel standard, those signals aren't being sent to say support electrolyzers, support clean energy, being turned into electrolytic hydrogen, and then putting that to use to reduce fossil fuel usage. As the Public Utilities Commission continues to plan for distributed energy resources, we'll see that the role that hydrogen can play in our energy sector. Hydrogen got major shout outs in our scoping plan, which is the document put out by the California Air Resources Board, talking about how hydrogen could potentially offset some of the use in gas peaker plants. And really, every single day, if you see news from industrial leaders in the hydrogen space, there's announcements coming for the newest, largest electrolyzer built at scale, or agreements to build in communities of California that have excess solar or wind capacity, but maybe are traditionally disadvantaged communities or areas that have needs to bring good jobs. So there's a lot of opportunity, and I look forward to hearing from Tyson and from Jesse about what their thoughts are. And so with that, I'm going to leave this slide up for just a second, but I'm going to pass this back to Ethan, and he can introduce Tyson and Jesse.
Great. Thank you so much, Ross, for that overview. And I appreciate you leaving the links up there for those who want to dig into the report. As Ross alluded to, this report came out of a stakeholder convening that the two law schools organized. And we've got a couple representatives of that convening process here to talk in more depth. I should note that Senator Nancy Skinner was going to join, but because we have a couple of our bargaining units still out on strike with the UC system, Senator Skinner did not want to cross that remaining picket line. So we certainly respect her decision and hope she can join future programs on this subject or others, because she's involved in a lot of important clean technology issues. But without further ado, I want to introduce Tyson Eckerly, Senior Advisor for Clean Infrastructure and Mobility in the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. Probably the coolest acronym in the Governor's Office, GoBiz. I mean, Tyson probably would agree with me, but I challenge anyone to come up with a better acronym. At the GoBiz, Tyson leads a team focused on scaling the zero-emission vehicle market. He organizes stakeholder efforts to remove market barriers, create opportunities, and streamline development. Prior to his role at GoBiz, he served as Executive Director of Energy Independence Now, a nonprofit focused on action-oriented solutions to petroleum dependence. And he has his bachelor's in biology from UC Davis and a master of environmental science and management from the Bren School down at UC Santa Barbara. So a true UC representative. Tyson, all yours.
There we go. Got the mute off. Thank you very much, Ethan. Thanks, Ross. That was a great overview, and it's great to be here. I love this whole series you guys have been doing for, it sounds like a decade. Has been really, really productive and helpful on our end. And we do refer to the reports quite a bit. So it's good to get everybody together. So we appreciate that. Everybody can see my slides, right? We're okay. Good. All right. Well, I'll give, nobody wants to try to fill in for Senator Skinner, but I'm going to try a little bit to give a little bit of the background and overview. So, but I wanted to go, and I think Ross touched on this stuff really well already. And so, but I think the scoping plan is worth driving into a little bit, and kind of as our North Star. How do we get to 2045, which is really just about 20 years away for carbon neutral? And so there's a lot of big things we have to do. We heard some of the numbers on solar and wind. We have to scale that up by 4 times. But the hydrogen supply, and particularly the renewable hydrogen supply, we need 1,700 more times more hydrogen than we have on the marketplace now compared to 2022 getting to 2045. So that's a massive scaling opportunity. And then you also heard a little bit about the bipartisan infrastructure law, or IIJA, and I thought it'd be good just to show pull out some of the text from that. And so this is the IIJA, and the hydrogen hubs opportunities really served as an opportunity to organize stakeholders in a big way. And so it's $8 billion, at least 4 hubs. We're hoping there's probably more, and they, of these hubs, there's a bunch of different parameters, but the ones that we're going after, the area that we're going after is highlighted here. So we want hydrogen produced from renewables. So electrolyzers have a outsized role to play in that. And then of course the end use diversity. So, we're looking at electric power, industrial uses like at the ports, and then transportation playing a big role, especially as we look at kind of air quality, and we're trying to improve, a lot of the corridors that have been challenged in terms of air for a long time. And so, when this came out, we thought, as the state of California, what do we want to get out of this opportunity? It's really 3 things: it's time, it's money, and innovation. And so the time thing is we're trying to use federal money to accelerate our transition to a zero carbon transportation and energy system. So it's really kind of underpinning the scoping plan. On the money side, we want to get to a financially self-sustaining and expanding, low carbon, renewable carbon, hydrogen market. And one of the key points is, we talk to industry. California is one of the few places where this is possible, thanks to a lot of our strong policies like the low carbon fuel standard, which helps underscore, and you can couple that on with the IRA tax credits, and it becomes really exciting. And then innovation, right? So here in California, we innovate and we help create new markets. And so we want our hub to help foster innovation, accelerate the global adoption of renewable hydrogen. And, if you look, and this slide has been shown a lot in the DOE context, but I thought it's good to bring it up here. This is the DOE, when they're initially putting the hydrogen hub opportunity together, they grouped the regions, and it's all regions. And then there's one state called out, and this is the state of California. And so, it's a big opportunity. I think there's, for us to help open those doors. But we have a lot of good resources as a diverse United States. And I think bringing these hubs together is a huge opportunity, but California really has to deliver. So just in terms of timing on the funding, I won't spend very much time here, but we did a concept paper that was submitted on November 7th. And then the next part of the application is due on April 7th. And then there's, a period of time to build out the market. So the first real projects, are at least 2 years out. It's in terms of the federal funding, but we're also, as you saw from the Energy Commission and from Air Resources Board and private industry, we're continuing to accelerate the market now. We have close to 60 hydrogen fueling stations for passenger vehicles. Our medium and heavy duty is budding. And so this is going to dovetail very nicely. And we're trying to make the case to be able to move quickly. And so this $8 billion is a huge opportunity, but we have to successfully organize the key parties. And so as a state, we stepped up on, this was October, so it feels like a year ago, but it was just about 2 months, and Ross was there to help. But we officially launched ARCHES, or the Alliance for Renewable Clean Hydrogen Energy Systems, And the idea there is to have one entity that is responsible for pulling all the pieces together and reporting up to DOE, and then making sure the funding from the Department of Energy is going to the projects and well organized. So we have one application in from the state that was through ARCHES. And so we're very excited about this. And I'll talk a little bit more about that now. This is kind of a busy slide, but ARCHES here, it's, it's spelled out. Our acronym, it's quite an acronym, but I'm falling in love with it a little bit more each day. And but that ARCHES thing, also just the visual, it's kind of the gateway and the arch into a new economy. And so we wanted to have that as part of it. And so, but you look at it, it's really taking a systems based approach. And if there's one thing we're driving towards, it's the kind of what's defined as the Earth shot by the Department of Energy, trying to get to $1 per kilogram produced hydrogen, renewable hydrogen by 2031, or $2 by 2026. And both of those numbers would make it very economically attractive to transition. And that's really what we're after. We're trying to get to make sure the economics are aligned so that investment flows and it makes sense to invest in renewable hydrogen over doing anything else that's fossil based. And so we're looking at from a whole system part, this is an opportunity to pull, transportation, to pull power, to pull ports all together to drive up scale, which can drive down the cost. We thought it's really important to stay true to our core principles, and you hear more from Jesse too about this, but we wanted the hub to be statewide, it's renewable, it's got to align with state interests, that's clear, solution oriented, so really about getting projects in the ground or the projects ready to go. The one in the middle is in the middle on purpose. It's equity and justice centers. We want to make sure that these projects directly benefit the communities that have suffered the most through time. We want to make sure our governance is objective and unbiased, and we have stakeholder and community engagement, and that's kind of, we're growing that as we go. It's multidimensional, so across multiple sectors, and then connected. And so that's an opportunity to pull all those pieces together. Back to the core of the report, the electrolyzer technology is fundamental to this because it's a great way to leverage our vast renewable resources here in the state. And then this is hard to kind of piece together. It keeps growing, but the network keeps growing. This is the ARCHES. It took a bunch of snapshots, so it's not that pretty, but you can go to the website there and kind of explore who's signed up. Not everybody who signed up has had their logo up on there, but you can see it's a pretty broad alliance of interested parties. And I think, that's what $1 billion will do a lot of times for getting people interested. But it's been a very constructive group through time. I thought it'd be good just to give highlights, what we submitted to the DOE as a concept paper. So the concept paper phase was kind of a sketch of what you think you can do within the hub context. We have not selected projects as ARCHES, so projects are being submitted now. So we'll go through a robust project selection and vetting process. But essentially the big things is we're asking for as much money as possible from the DOE, which is $1.25 billion. And that would be matched by, $4.75 billion, with state and private funds. And then focusing on interconnected sectors, as I've mentioned, so it's power, it's transportation and ports. Some of the thinking is, the power demand can help drive up the scale of hydrogen and drive down the cost for all the other uses. And so that's kind of, because it'll take some time to get the rolling stock transitioned over to fuel cell electric trucks, for example. But then the scale is really a big one, 500 tons a day by 2030. And then scaling very quickly from 2030 to 2045, when the economics work, it's 45,000 tons a day by 2045, and that kind of aligns with the scoping plan. And then just as we're kind of, as we're launching these things, we're trying to get the sector perspective, from a sector, like within the transportation as an example, what do we need to build as a system? So we have working groups on that side, and then on the project providers are actually pulling projects together to get funded by DOE. And so we're trying to establish a strong foundation like this report does, if kind of knowledge and what we need and policy implementation tools that we need to make sure that this market is ultimately successful. And then the projects are built on top of that. And then this is a final thing, just conceptually, kind of like how markets work and how we've been successful in California and other things. I was just playing around with this and I sketch a little bit, but it's, call it our wheel of fortune, and you guys can see, we can take it or leave it. But essentially, the idea is we need to create demand. Then once we kind of create that demand, we can organize and motivate stakeholders, implement, and then scale. And so it's worked in the solar industry, right? You have the renewable portfolio standard, then you have the California Solar Initiative. you implement and you scale with like the production tax credits or investment tax credits and that kind of virtuous cycle. Now we have this strong solar market, same thing in the zero emission vehicle market with the ZEV regulation, CVRP, AB8 funding. You can kind of start to pull the wheel together. And it's the same thing we're seeing happening on the hydrogen side. And I think that's why it's really exciting, why I'm very optimistic. And so sorry for my kind of gross handwriting, but it's like, we have our carbon neutral targets in 2045. We have our ZEV targets. We have the climate package with 54 billion last year that the governor passed. And then this hydrogen hubs, this IIJA, that is the 1.25 billion opportunity in California. It's really serving to pull stakeholders together and get us organized and be thinking strategically about how we can invest in a coordinated way to open up the market. Let's not build 3 pipelines, let's build 1 type of a thing for it to carry the same. And then you implement, but then the scale opportunity is the IRA, right? Because they can get up to $3 per kilogram of a tax credit for, renewable low carbon intensity hydrogen fuel. And it's an opportunity to create that virtuous wheel. And I think that's why it's really exciting. And I think, I'm excited next to hand it over to Jesse, who, because a core part of all of this is making sure that we do right by the communities, throughout the state. And so hopefully that it didn't take too much time for that.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Tyson, for that. Great to have the update on ARCHES, and people have already started doing it. I know Ross put it in the chat, but definitely use the Q&A function because we're going to have some time for questions and we want to take some of your questions to the extent that we have time available. So do take advantage of that for questions for our speakers. And I did enjoy the Wheel of Fortune, Tyson. I think it's a helpful framework and very appropriate for a hydrogen hub too. So hopefully that's the artwork featured in your application to the federal government there. All right, well, without further ado, let me pass it over to Jesse Marquez, who's the Executive Director of the Coalition for a Safe Environment, which is an environmental justice community organization in Wilmington, California. Jesse is a lifetime resident there and works on addressing the environmental and public health impacts on Wilmington residents and the local harbor community there. He works a lot on ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, as well as regional goods movement issues and addressing pollution from those sources. So Jesse, I'll hand it to you.
Hello, thank you very much. So that you do know, in my early childhood after high school, I went into a 4-year electronics training program at the Long Beach Naval Shipyard. And so I did graduated as an ET, electronic technician. So for 20 years after that, I was a test technician, test supervisor, production supervisor. Then I became a production manager, manufacturing engineer, quality engineer. So I have an excellent technical background on how to build things. Everything from a little coffee heater warmer to the missile guidance system on the MX missile that protects the United States. So I've worked on little simple things and I've worked on, secret clearance type things as well. So that's why it gives me a good understanding when we're talking about technologies. About 5 years ago is when our organization started to think, okay, we're hearing a lot of talk about hydrogen. Maybe we should start researching it, building up our file of information and resources. And so we began to do that. Then approximately a year later, we were introduced to the California Hydrogen Business Council. And then I was invited to attend one of their presentations at the Bannings Landing in Wilmington. And then the following 2 years after that, I was invited to also be a presenter there. And so that you know where I'm coming from, after these years of studying hydrogen, I do feel it is a viable alternative, that it is the best alternative now for the future. Yes, I study and keep up to date on other battery technologies, but I'm also a realist. There are major issues that need to be addressed now and in the future. And so that's why I threw in my hat to begin to support the technologies that were being presented. One of the first things is that, just like our organization, we knew zero about hydrogen. And so what fortunate thing I did was put together a little proposal, and I submitted it to the California Hydrogen Business Council to fund us to do a little animated film about what is, green hydrogen technology and how do you create and make the gas. And so as a result of that little film, we learned quite a bit, and we've had thousands of environmental justice and disadvantaged local community organizations, present this and show this information, showing that, there's nothing evil, there's nothing terribly bad, about it, because we want people to have a good understanding. So it added up to a hydrogen 101 type public education tool that we use. Now, when we're talking about, environmental justice communities and disadvantaged communities, well, Wilmington is a poster child. You know, the largest port in the United States is here. The largest port infrastructure, transportation is here. We have 4 oil refineries here. We have methane brownfields, industries built on top of those here. And so we've had to deal with a lot of things, and it's been a big burden on us because, you know, we're talking about public health issues and public safety issues. And so what I have been doing now in our research is then breaking down what would be the biggest objections by communities and environmental justice communities and environmental justice organizations. And so that you know, about 15 years ago, Port of LA was entertaining a proposal to build an LNG facility there. And we organized to stop it, and we did. It then went to the Port of Long Beach, and it was going forward there, and we opposed it, and it was canceled there. So there have been times we have gone against gases, even natural gas in this particular case. But again, why? Well, one of the big whys is because it deals with safety, public safety. And then there's always safety issues anytime you're dealing with a fossil fuel, whether it's liquid or gas. But then you also have to understand, where does little Jesse homeboy here come from? Well, I grew up in Wilmington. Across the street from us is the city of Carson and was the Fletcher Oil Refinery. Well, in the late 60s, it exploded. Okay. Well, it burned all 8 members of my family from 1st degree to 3rd degree. Grandma had 3rd degree burns on her neck, down to her shoulder, down her arms, if she was guarding outside. Over 200 people were burned or injured as a result of that. And it wasn't just like risk assessments where they say, oh, well, 1 tank might explode. Blank that shit. I was there, 3 exploded. Okay, we had to run for our lives. Okay, so I know what safety is. So don't tell me about all the, you know, the water hoses and whatever else you have there. When it explodes, nothing happens in those first few minutes. You know, your water sprinklers don't come on. There's no fire department there. There's no public safety there, because in the first few minutes, that's when all the damage is done. Okay, and so that's why safety becomes a big picture. And this is why, you know, we've been doing research okay, what are the safety features in manufacturing of hydrogen gas and liquid hydrogen? What about the safety of storage of hydrogen gas or hydrogen liquid? What about the safety transportation of hydrogen gas? We're talking about pipelines, underground and above ground routes. We're talking about tanker trucks and truck routes, tanker trains and truck routes. Then we're looking at, okay, what about the location? What are the risk assessments? Well, then I'm looking at, what is the proximity to an environmental justice disadvantaged community? What is the proximity to sensitive receptors, such as public schools, parks, recreation facilities? Proximity to sensitive receptors, child care centers, senior and citizen housing. What is the proximity to other hazardous chemical manufacturing, storage, or transportation? Will it replace existing petroleum infrastructures? And then what are the cumulative impacts and the risk associated with it? So what we've been doing in that regard is now looking, what are the emerging technologies and where could they be of use in our world here? Well, then we're talking about port zero-emission drayage trucks on road, zero-emission drayage trucks off-road, delivery and utility trucks, cargo handling equipment, trains, ships and watercrafts, port power, zero-emission ship shore power, zero-emission ship alternative barge ship power, zero-emission construction equipment. So this has been the world where I've been exploring and researching. One thing that we also do, and even though we're a small organization, we're the only one that does it in the city of LA County, state of California, United States, and believe it or not, the whole world. What we do is we also publish a zero emissions vehicle and equipment survey. So when we are talking to port officials and they're having public presentations and they are going to misrepresent the facts, also called a lie to the public and to elected officials and commissioners. Oh, we can't find a zero-emission Class 8 drayage truck. Well, we publish a list of manufacturer and the truck model, and the list is over 20 drayage trucks that are available today now that you can purchase. Now, what is the problem that the ports will emphasize? Well, they can't meet all of our criteria for going for the long hauls, which is true. None of them right now can basically go over 300 miles. However, those 20 can all go under 250 miles, which means they can replace 75% right now of all diesel natural gas trucks today now, because they can do the short hauls. Now, last night, we just finished our latest update of that document, and now we're adding one new thing to it. We would just say zero emission, but now we're designating if it's battery operated or hydrogen fuel cell operated. And so that's sort of the state where I'm at right now. I've contacted over 25 EJ organizations in the state of California, and they've agreed that they'll be working with me and following our lead on this. And we are and have been getting involved with ARCHES and the federal government in terms of trying to keep up and understand everything that's going on. Unfortunately, the last 3 months, I ran into some health problems and also with my mother as well. And so I got a little delayed in things I was able to do. But these are the things that we are moving forward to, and we're doing presentations. I just came from a meeting, which is our quarterly meeting with the new EPA Region 9 Administrator, Martha Guzman. She's in Wilmington right now from 10 to 1 o'clock. And I passed out 5 handouts of technologies, okay? One was a new Hyster top pick container loader, hydrogen fuel cell, okay? The other one is a maglev freight train, zero emission, also hydrogen fuel cell electric. So this list, is international, has over 200 companies in it. And like I said, that is the work and contribution we're making so that our public and our communities have a good understanding of what's out there. And then we're here to support the hydrogen economy implementation in California as well as in the United States. And thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Jesse. Really appreciate you bringing the community perspective, particularly on safety, given your personal history there. I think those are some of the obviously foundational questions that I'm sure a lot of people in decision-making positions are hearing from residents. And if they're not, I'm glad you're out there advocating and looking out for that. We've got some great questions coming in on the Q&A, so please do, for those who have questions, use that function. And Tyson, let me go to you with a question that I'm seeing a sort of this theme here coming out of a few of the questions in the Q&A, which is around the end use and the sort of what the target end use might be for the hydrogen, at least as you're envisioning it. I mean, 10 years ago, we were thinking hydrogen might be a solution for light duty vehicles, for example, and the technology on batteries, as Jesse alluded to, has really changed a lot. And so we're now kind of narrowing the scope on the transportation side. So backup power, could the same thing happen where other technologies, non-hydrogen technologies, can play some of that long duration energy storage, zero emission energy storage role? So I'm curious kind of where you're seeing the end use is being most promising right now for zero emission hydrogen.
Yeah, so I think that, I think Ross said it well. It is kind of a Swiss Army knife, right? And I think it's applying it to where it makes the most sense. And so I think that it's very easy to get sucked into, pitting technologies or places against one another. I think there's kind of a bleeding effect, even just using like light duty and heavy duty as an example. If hydrogen makes up 20% of the light duty market or even 10%, that's still quite a few cars on the road. And so but I imagine like in the transportation context, I think very heavy push because it's the hardest to do. And a lot of is that class 8, class 6 through 8, because on the battery side, there's some challenges from infrastructure, from the payload and all that. We're seeing a lot of promise in the buses as well. But then from integrating the grid, and I think you'll see that part of that 1,700 times more hydrogen is really to make sure that we're connecting, our renewable resources, which, of course, have the sun shines and the wind blows at different times, to the stable kind of base load power needs. And I think that's a huge opportunity for hydrogen. And so what we're trying to do is just basically enable all of it as much as possible and kind of get out of the way, but I think, broadly speaking, let's play to the strengths to all the technologies. I mean, getting to carbon neutral without kind of that fossil asset is really hard. And so I think, and that's where, I think hydrogen can help bridge a lot of those gaps.
Great, thank you, Tyson. Jesse, let me go to you with a question we just got in from the Q&A, which is how do you feel the city of LA leaders are or are not engaging with Wilmington and other harbor communities around the plans for a green hydrogen hub. What are your thoughts on this project, and what protections do community members want it to include?
Okay, well, here's our number one fear right now. The federal government's going to provide $1 billion plus, but the applicants are government agencies. So the Port of Los Angeles, the Port of Long Beach, they would be the applicant. Well, here is the problem. For over 21 years of our existence, we have made hundreds of requests and recommendations that include zero-emission technologies, hydrogen fuel cell technologies in numerous applications, and the port has never gone along with one of our recommendations. So that's why there's an importance to have public oversight in that decision-making, so that, yes, there will be a category of funding that will say hydrogen, fuel cell trains, hydrogen fuel cell ship power, hydrogen fuel cell barges that'll provide alternate ship power. That way the ports cannot manipulate it and not do it. The history of the ports is to delay it as long as possible. The first electric battery ZE truck went bankrupt. The first hydrogen fuel cell truck went bankrupt. Why? Because the ports will test you forever. And after 5-6 years of testing, they don't give the thumbs up for any truck company to purchase and to give them credit for it. So those are some of the things that on one end that we have to deal with to assure it's a fair, social, and equitable introduction, and it's not going to be manipulated. And the big example I use is the Alameda Corridor. It was a $2 billion project. We, the public, supported it. We, the public, are paying for it as well. And the purpose was to take trucks off the freeways and put them on the Alameda Corridor. Well, guess what? This year in February, the ACTA board announced it's operating in the red. 4 years ago, when I was at the board meeting, it operated in the red. Why is it operating in the red and not making money? Because, see, the Port of LA and Port of Long Beach commissioners make up the ACTA board. And they have never passed anything so that ports are required in their lease to increase their percentage use of the Alameda Corridor. So that's why it's important to have public oversight, so that we make sure the goal and purpose is achieved. That, yes, we want a smooth implementation, but not to be manipulated by backroom politics and what's been used by lobbyists and donators, to candidates' campaigns in the past. We want to make it a fair and equitable transition and introduction.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Jesse, for kind of spelling out your concerns and priorities there. Tyson, I wanted to go to you with a question from the Q&A again, which has to do with the accounting. This is such a big issue with hydrogen when you're looking at the emissions profile, because the feedstock can be varied, and then of course the end use also has a big impact on the emissions profile. So the question is, given Arch's commitment to renewable zero-emission green hydrogen, will GoBiz engage in the California Air Resources Board's low-carbon fuel standard rulemaking process that's going to be coming up? That sounds like they're going to be restarting that. And there is, of course, a national effort right now, regulation-wise, to try to really narrow down the accounting for hydrogen, so the public can have assurance about how truly zero emission is this technology, or low emission. So is GoBiz engaging on that, and do you have any further thoughts in general about the accounting processes that are ongoing here?
The accounting is super important for a number of reasons, and so it's all about carbon intensity. So we have to get to thinking in numbers and not colors is kind of one of the core things. And so the DOE has put out their standard, which we're comfortable with at the Air Resources Board, GoBiz, Energy Commission, Public Utilities Commission, and that's the 4 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of hydrogen produced. That is on a life cycle basis. And so we're, but there's a few things that are driving this. The IRA tax credit, the lower carbon intensity, the more credit you can get. And so I think that's, with those incentives aligning, I think you're going to see a lot of that driving down. And the importance is in making sure that we're accurate in that accounting. But so the thing that we're stressing from the state of California is it's got to be a life cycle assessment of the carbon intensity, and that really matters. And the end use, as you state, matters, but it's less so if you can make sure that the upstream emissions go, but it's taken into account, the pipeline travel, the truck travel, all those types of things. And then to the question of engaging in the other processes, we're deeply coordinated with the Air Resources Board and Energy Commission, Public Utilities Commission on all of these things that related to ARCHES and related to the build out of the market. And so the short answer is yes, we will be engaged.
Yeah, Tyson, I wanted to follow up with you with something that Jesse was talking about in terms of the labor, the labor standards, the good jobs. Can you just talk a little bit about how, when in the formation of ARCHES and the launch of ARCHES, how the labor unions, good jobs, just transition was really centered and fleshed out a little bit more in its at a core level.
Yeah, so at the core level with ARCHES, one of the founding partners is the State Building and Construction Trades, and they have so we have the largest union in the state of California, and then we're also the largest union in the country, kind of, and all those things, and the support has been tremendous. And so all of the labor standards, union contract, all that stuff is built into the core foundation of ARCHES. And that's a big part of why that partnership matters is going back to safety, right? Because the workers need to make sure that the stuff that they're building is safe, and it's safe for them on the job, and then also off the job. And I've been incredibly impressed with the unions and their training facilities and their commitment to that worker safety and training. And so they have been, there from day one, in fact. And so that's one of, I think, ARCHES' probably most strong assets.
Right.
This is just a comment on what Tyson was saying. In one of the studies that we had done by the Harbor Community Benefit Foundation, it was to identify all the external impacts of the port's operation. But there was also another question that we wanted to be researched, and that was the city's claim, the port's claim of all the job development it does in the harbor. So I told the engineering firm, you focus on Wilmington. How many jobs are employing Wilmington residents? And in supporting industry, how many jobs are hiring Wilmington residents? And when the study was completed, 3.4% of the adult male and female working population of Wilmington work for the ports or supporting industry. So what's the revelation? They've lied to us. Everybody else got hired except for Wilmington residents where it's located.
So I think that's a great point, Jesse. And that's where, so the unions in particular, they have that big outreach and pipeline, and training system. And I think, identifying those gaps of where, the people who should be getting the jobs, if they're not, like, that's the kind of thing we absolutely want to go after within the hydrogen hub context. It's a huge opportunity, from a social mobility perspective. And I think, but the labor unions are like, they're very committed to that vision, but sometimes it's like, we don't know what we don't know, and so that it's really helpful that we commission that.
Yeah. And Jesse, I think, one of the things that we learned in doing this report is also about, we have to build local capacity. A lot of the places that we're going to build electrolyzers are smaller and more rural places in the Inland Empire, in the Central Valley, places that haven't necessarily been exposed to, the same community workforce benefit agreements that we have in like places like the city of Los Angeles or in the Bay Area and in dense urban populations. So, I think, Tyson, is that something that you folks are looking at within your ARCHES governance structure in terms of helping these local governments kind of get the solar plus electrolyzer facilities online in different places and different geographies?
Yeah, I mean, we're open to all of it. We're trying to, whatever makes the most sense for the market, but certainly from the labor standards perspective, that'll be very well covered through the labor unions have a seat on the board, for example, in the draft governance structure.
So we've got a couple questions in here related to water. So we've only got a couple minutes left here, but Tyson, I'm wondering if you could maybe address some of the concerns around water, what ARCHES might be doing about that, and Jesse, if you wanted to weigh in on that as well. But
I have a solution for the water.
Well, maybe I'll go to you, Jesse. So if you have a solution, I'll go to you first.
Okay, here's what the world doesn't really know a lot about, and that are sanitation departments. We have the Los Angeles Sanitation Department, county, and one of the locations is in Carson, right across the street from Wilmington, where the refinery exploded. They process water, treat water, and are currently dumping 250 million gallons a day of treated water into the ocean. This is the purple pipe. They're building another outfill pipe that allow 500 to 600 million gallons a day being dumped into the ocean. So California has a water crisis. Well, sort of, yes, but is there water available? Yes. The purple pipe is alive and well. It's right here in the city of Carson and can be used for any electrolyzer within 100 miles of here.
So the recycled water solution,
Yes,
Tyson, what
so
do you,
I've
what do
already
you?
been to
Yeah,
that.
no,
to
I was going
them.
to say the same
I've
thing.
been to the municipality one, I've been to the alley department of DWP, and, they have all met me in this regard. And so again, we're supporting projects and identifying what are the solutions to make it happen, okay?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but like High Build LA, through Green Hydrogen Coalition had an analysis done by the Pacific Northwest National Lab that was looking at the water. And it, of course, is an issue, but it's not a gigantic issue. And I think, to Jesse's point, that purple pipe, when available, is a huge opportunity. And even just using like the Plug Power, they have a 15-ton per day project down in Mendota, and they're using purple pipe water, so they.
And I have a map of the purple white infrastructure for Wilmington, and I can get it for wherever else it goes to. But I'm saying the resources are there. Okay, we can get that information, we can tap into it, and then how can we incorporate it into our overall big plan?
Got it. Well, we just got, sorry, go ahead, Ross.
Ethan, I know you're going to go to the last question, but I just, one of the things that we learned in doing this report was that, you can absolutely use recycled, reclaimed purple pipe water. We just need to continue to do research. So, the California Energy Commission has a long history of the water energy nexus, and doing through the EPIC program, this type of work of applied research. We have to keep researching ways to make sure that we don't degrade the electrolyzer by putting in reclaimed water or anything that's less than tap water quality. But it certainly looks like, as Jesse and Tyson both said, it's certainly looked like it is the future.
All right. Well, we've just got about 30 seconds left. So maybe Jesse and Tyson, just real quick, what are some of the sort of next steps, upcoming decision points that you wanted to flag for folks tuning in here? And Jesse, I'll start with you.
Well, community participation in the oversight of any grants given out so that, they're not bypassing our priorities. My priority is hydrogen fuel cell. The portal never done it. It hasn't done it for the last 10 years. So we want to make sure that when we structure the proposals or the RFPs, they will fill in that gap so the port cannot avoid it. It will be a priority for our community as well as for using public funds.
All right. And Tyson, last word.
I'm excited about the market. This hydrogen hubs has been a big opportunity, but the next thing coming out, the IRA, tax guidance will come out, I think, this next year. So that'll drive a lot of investment. But then April 7th is when we'll submit the California state application, and we'll need support for that too.
Great. All right. Well, I want to thank Tyson Eckerly, Senior Advisor for Clean Infrastructure Mobility in the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, and Jesse Marquez, Executive Director of the Coalition for a Safe Environment, for joining us on the panel today. And on behalf of my colleagues at CLEE and UCLA Law School's Emmett Institute, as well as Bank of America, I want to thank all of you for tuning into this webinar. Do check the websites, climatepolicysolutions.org, if you want to get more information. I apologize to those we couldn't get to your questions. We'll try to answer those offline. You can also sign up on both the CLEE and Emmett Institute's mailing list to hear about more webinars like this on all sorts of topics related to climate action. But thank you all, and we'll stay tuned on what's next for zero emission hydrogen, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.